Hey, what's going on everybody? I'm Ezzo, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be looking at an overview of all 11 classes in Crowfall and helping you pick which one's best for you at launch. When picking your class in Crowfall, I think it's most important to pick something that fits you and that you will want to create a build with. Do you like heavy melee brawlers? Do you like fast-moving bursty damage dealers? Do you like to support your team with a powerful tank that provides buffs and debuffs to your team and enemy? Are you a healer, a mage, a swordsman? All that sorts of stuff. Pick something that you like. There is no clear right or wrong answer. I once heard Crowfall is like an onion, and what that means is as you keep diving into the game that is Crowfall and you peel back the layers, you discover more and more just how in depth all systems of the game are. This applies to the combat too. For this reason, I would not pick a class based off of a meta, but instead based off the knowledge and effort you are willing to put forth towards maximizing your ability in that vessel. Now let's take a look at the 11 current playable classes in Crowfall. To begin, we have the Champion. In combat, they are bursty, mobile damage dealers or well-rounded tanks supporting their team wielding large two-handed mauls and axes. Their basic attacks will build up rage that then allows them to use their damage combos. They are the most self-sustaining DPS class in the game, so I recommend them to anyone that likes brawlers. Their 3 base powers granted would include Neckbreaker, their ultimate that deals large damage in an AoE, Massive Cleave, which deals damage in front of them and combos into Whirling Pain, and their ability Leap, which allows them to launch forward, dealing damage where they land twice. Potential promotions include the Alpha Warriors, which have increased critical damage and are a bit less tanky than other champions, but have much more damage. The Barbarian, which is close behind the Alpha Warriors in damage, will provide much more CC to control the battlefield and heal themselves. And the Pit Fighters, which deal much less damage, but have enough to kill targets in smaller fights, but are far more tanky and much better at surviving longer to buff the team or debuff the enemy. Playable races would include Stoneborn, Half-Giant, Minotaur, and Centaur. Next, we have the Confessor, the Fire Mage. They call forth firebolts, flaming meteors, and fiery tornadoes while casting from the power of their book. Confessors have great AoE and single target damage and heals, making them useful in all engagements. Their 3 basic powers granted would include Immolation, their ultimate that blinds nearby enemies, teleports them forward, and makes them invisible. Absolution, a damage ability scaled based off a debuff placed on the enemy target from the Confessor's basic attacks called Sin, and can slow at 5 stacks of Sin built up on the target. And Hellfire Shield, a deadly combo which shields the Confessor in flames and can summon fiery tornadoes. Potential promotions would be the Fanatic, which is the main damage promotion of the Confessor. They can summon waves of fire and deal as much fire damage as possible. Inquisitors, which are the healer hybrid, using their flames to heal allies and harm their enemies. And Sanctifiers, which are the defensive Confessor, which sacrifice the benefits of being ranged to have more melee-focused abilities and use more crowd control to control the fight in their team's favor. Playable races would include the Nithari, High Elf, and Elkin. The Duelist is a rare breed only playable by the Ganetian race. They master both melee and ranged combat, attacking from stealth with rapiers, explosives, and flintlock pistols. The Duelist uses pips built up from their basic attacks to power up their abilities. Their 4 basic powers would include Vanish, which is their ultimate that makes them enter stealth and leave behind a decoy that knocks down enemies. Pepperbox Shot, which blasts up to 3 targets with their pistol, scaled off the pips spent. Impale, which stabs their target, causing them to bleed until their health has dropped underneath the threshold. And their ability Keen Guard, a defensive barrier scaled off the pips spent. Their potential promotions would include the Slayer, which is a dual pistol wielding high critical damage spec that packs a punch, but doesn't have much to defend themselves other than mobility. The Dirge, which is a defensive duelist wearing plate armor and mainly wielding their sword to lunge toward and knock down enemies, leaving lasting damage over time effects to whittle them down. And the Vanguard Scout, which drains the enemy resources and uses crowd control to control the fight in their favor. Playable races, as mentioned, is only the Ganetian. Knights are frontline melee fighters that use a sword or mace and shield, defending their allies behind their shield or pulling in enemies with their chains to execute them with their weapon. Knights are always a great choice to have on your team. Their 4 base powers would include Whirling Leap, which is their ultimate, pulling in enemies, dealing crushing damage in an AoE when you land. Shield Swipe, a 2-part combo that stuns their target. Shield Block, which offers them instead of dodging, you can block with your shield to reduce incoming damage and slowly increase your damage as you block more. And their ability Onslaught, a 3-part combo attack that can knock down enemies or apply an AoE bleed. Potential promotions include the Swordsman, which wear mail armor instead of plate but deal lots of more damage. The Sentinel, which is the mace-wielding spec, using crushing damage and more crowd control. Or the Secutor, which is a shield-focused spec that is extremely hard to kill due to their tankiness. Playable races would include the Human, Fae, High Elf, Stoneborn, Elkin, Centaur, and Ganetian. Rangers are skilled in both melee and ranged combat, dual-wielding weapons and using strong bows of all damage types. They can swap between melee and range on all specs, and can use crowd control to keep the enemy in place while they use their mobility to lay down damage. They are one of the only classes in the game with large amounts of self-sustain through lifesteal. Their 4 basic powers would include Sustain, which is their ultimate that grants lifesteal, allowing the ranger to regenerate health off of damage. Their ability Rapid Fire, which is a channeled bow attack that shoots up to 8 arrows. Twin Surge, a combo ability that can reduce enemy damage as well as restore stamina to the ranger. And their last ability would be Concussive Trap, which is a trap only visible to the ranger, which is placed at their feet and explodes when the enemy approaches it, dealing fire damage and stunning the enemy. Potential promotions would include the Archer, which is a long-ranged, primarily bow-wielding sniper that uses charge to damage shots and positioning to allow quick kills with their high damage. The Warden, which is a Trap Master, a well-rounded ranger that uses both melee and ranged in combat to lay down damage and control the enemy while trying to bait them into their traps, wearing mail armor and receiving damage barriers from their traps to help sustain, as they do less damage than a Brigand and Archer. The Brigand, which is the stealth variant of the ranger, ambushing enemies out of stealth with mostly melee weapons, poisons, and traps with very high damage. Playable races would include the Human, Half-Elf, Wood Elf, Elkin, and Minotaur. Assassins attack from stealth, building pips to spend on combos, applying poisons to their blades, and relying on crowd control to keep their enemy down. Their 4 basic powers would include Shadow Step, their ultimate that blinks them forward, enters them into the stealth, and blinds the enemy. Backstab, which deals damage regenerating pips with increased damage behind the target. Their ability In the Zone, which increases power efficiency and damage dealt from behind the target based on pips spent. And their ability Blink Step, which teleports them to the target, dealing damage and regenerating a pip. Potential promotions would include Cutthroats, which have big damage from stealth ambushing and behind attacks. Vandals, which try to apply extra poison damage and use extra crowd control to drain the enemy's stamina. And Blackguards, which try to outsustain their enemy with barriers, healing, and stealth. Playable races would include the Half-Elf, Ithari, Fae, and High Elf. Clerics use divine magic to heal their allies and damage their opponents, while wielding a hammer and shield. Clerics can be great supports and damage dealers with AoE and crowd control. Their basic powers would include Miracle, an ultimate that heals nearby group members and increases their critical strike. Divine Order, which pushes away enemies, deals holy damage, and causes basic attacks to chain nearby targets and stun enemies. Flash of Light, which deals damage to their target and blinds them. Holy Symbol, which summons a celestial force to heal up to 5 allies in an AoE. And their ability Illuminate, which restores resources and heals your group over time. Potential promotions would include the Radical, which sacrifices their healing potential to use their divine magic to deal heavy damage to enemies. The Arbiters, which excel at using crowd control on opponents. And the Crusaders, which are great at defense and healing, putting out massive healing output for their team while being very hard to knock down. Playable classes would include the Human, Stoneborn, Half-Giant, Elkin, Centaur, and Ganetian. Druids can build towards nature damage, electricity damage, and support power healing. Archdruids and Earthkeepers utilize a staff that allows them to switch between Life Tray focused on healing and gaining essence, or Death Tray focused on damage and expending essence, and Stormcallers can utilize a sickle to summon and cast lightning damage. They have to balance this resource depending on what they are doing to help their team, healing or damage output. Their base powers would include Death Surge, their ultimate that pulls in targets, inflicting damage on them and healing the Druid, ending with a damage bonus buff. Blight, an AoE that damages enemies and reduces their resistances. Ritual Sacrifice, an ability where you sacrifice health for essence. And Grasping Roots, an AoE root that keeps the target in place. Potential promotions would include the Stormcaller, which is your pure destruction druid, harnessing lightning magic and sacrificing the ability to generate healing. They do not suffer essence burn, as they focus purely on doing damage. The Archdruid, which as long as they maintain their balance, can set up powerful explosions on enemy groups and efficiently heal their allies when needed. And Earthkeepers, which are your pure healing druid, focusing on resource regeneration and creating an abundance of life orbs to help their allies. Playable races would include Half-Elf, Fae, and Wood Elf. Frostweavers use the power of ice to lock down and damage enemies, or restore resources and health to allies. This is the Ice Mage. Their basic powers would include Refrigerate, which is their ultimate that refills their ice stores and mana. Hold Comfort, which is their ultimate that is a group heal and restores mana to the Frostweaver. Their ability Freezing Blast, which does damage to enemies in an AoE. And their ability Shatterstorm, which also does damage to enemies in an AoE. Potential promotions would include the Archmage, which uses their ice magic to quickly explode targets before they even have a chance to react. The Ice Caller, which uses their healing and defensive creations to aid the team and keep them alive and running. And the Frost Guard, which uses their ice to defend themselves and often debuff the enemy. Playable races would include the Fae, the Wood Elf, and the High Elf. Myrmidons are a melee class which dual wield axes or maces, dealing lots of slashing or crushing damage and laying down powerful bleeds. Some Myrmidons use the Berserk Crash mechanic, which makes them incredibly tanky for a short amount of time, before they have to prevent the crash or take a lot of damage. Their base powers would include Raging Bull, their ultimate that flings nearby enemies away and deals damage. Berserk, which while berserking, Myrmidons can heal themselves whenever their health falls lower than its initial berserking value. Neck Slash, which deals a large amount of damage to a target, only usable after going berserk. And Colossus Smash, which allows them to lunge forward, deal damage, and stun the target where they land. Potential promotions would include the Titan, which is the main Berserk Crash spec that deals massive damage through Neck Slash combos and stuns, relying on preventing the crash at the end. Conquerors, which use crowd control and a lot more bleeds in the fight, typically applying bleeds to several enemies in a group and trying to heal off all the damage that those bleeds do. They are immune to crowd control during Berserk and suffer no crash. And Battle Ragers, which are the tank spec that must also prevent a crash. They gain extra barriers from whirlwinding, and they heal based off enemies nearby when they activate Berserk. They must mitigate their crash by actively attacking a bleeding enemy. Their playable races would be Stoneborn, Half-Giant, and Minotaur. Templars are warriors of divine light that have mastered the use of greatswords. They parry incoming melee attacks and can block ranged. They are great healers as paladins and amazing damage dealers. They have to use pips for all abilities, built up from their abilities and basic attacks. Their base powers would include Brilliance, their ultimate, that increases their maximum health and heals, and stuns and deals fire damage to nearby enemies. Holy Warrior, which heals the Templar and increases their max health, while converting all damage to holy damage, which is unmitigatable. Righteous Stand, which allows them to enter a defensive posture instead of dodging, and mitigates incoming damage and allows the Templar to trigger their most powerful damage ability, Righteous Parry. This is blocking. And Censure, a leap forward, stunning a target, and generating pips. Potential promotions would include the Vindicator, which sacrifices heavy armor for superior damage. Their base damage is greatly increased off of their fire damage statistic. The Fury, which is a heavily armored Templar that uses crowd control to keep their allies safe and control the battlefield. And the Paladin, which is a heavily armored Templar that are really hard to knock down through their parries and really powerful burst heals. Playable races would include the Nithari, the Elkin, and the Human. Every class will require you to learn them mechanically and statistically before you can see the performance you would expect. This would include theory crafting a build perfect to your playstyle with over 200 in-game disciplines that are divided into domains, 3 of each given to your each different promotion class within each class. Once you master all these things for your class, you can feel so immersed in the combat with all these combinations that you put together. If you enjoyed this video, then you'll love the custom playlist I made for you called Crowfall News and Guides. Make sure to check it out, as well as check out my website, ezogaming.com, for some written guides as well. And as always, I hope you all have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you guys may be in the world right now, and I will see you guys later.